Well, good morning, and thank you all so much for being here today. We're so excited to see such a full crowd of people here once again to talk about innovation in education and how we can improve outcomes for our kiddos in our classrooms, because we all know those 1.5 million kids are the most important treasure that we have in our state. So as Brenda said in her opening remarks, we don't really have a shared definition of what competency-based education, mastery-based education, student-centered learning. We have all these different terms that we've been kind of floating around for several years. But we don't have a common definition in our state of what that means. And so one of the goals of our lab today is to really center around that common definition. And we've decided to make an umbrella term for all the terms that are related to student-centered frameworks called tailored learning. And today I'm so happy to have two national experts who are going to share some expertise from outside of North Carolina and help us better understand how we may be able to implement some of the things they've seen working in a positive way for students in other states in our state to improve the educational outcomes and the educational opportunities for all 1.5 million of those kiddos. And so today I'm very happy to be joined by Virgil Hammonds from Full Scale Solutions and Dr. Lisa McIntyre-Height, who is joining us from CBEN. And Lisa, I would love to start with you. Across education, terms like competency-based education, mastery-based learning, and personalized learning are often used in different ways, which can make it difficult for educators and policymakers to align around a common vision. From your perspective, how do these approaches relate to one another, and how do they come together within the broader concept we are calling tailored learning?
Sorry. No, go ahead.
Well, and then as a follow-on, we'd also love to know what distinguishes tailored learning from simply improving instruction within a traditional time-based model.
I love that we're starting with grappling with definitions, right? Because as educators, we are like so good at creating alphabet soup and 1,000 other words for things. And we're like, wait, wasn't that differentiated instruction like 10 years ago? So I love that we're getting clear on our language to get started. I think it's really important. We can't drive policy or practice without a shared definition. So all that said, I'm actually going to start by defining something you didn't ask me to define. I want to define what I mean when I say competency, because all of us probably have different ideas of what that means. And so for CBEN, a competency is the knowledge and the skill, plus the ability and the disposition it takes to do that knowledge or skill in practice. So it is not just a set of rote academic skills, it is the skills plus the behaviors packaged into one. And I just wanna underscore how important that is as we have conversations throughout the day today and moving forward, because it is those dispositions that are uniquely human. And in a world where we can't predict the jobs of the future, we need to be very, very clear on what are the behaviors like empathy, teamwork. In nursing, they say things like demonstrate compassionate care. How are we actually fostering dispositions alongside skills? And how are we doing that in a way that's going to allow for economic mobility and opportunity for our learners? And so keep that in mind when I say competency, I'm talking about that whole package. So competency-based education for CBEN is the system redesign, right? And so it really is thinking about moving away from time as a proxy for learning to truly competency as the proxy for learning. We're measuring competency, we're not measuring time, and that requires a whole system redesign, whether we're talking about K-12 or higher education. When we talk about mastery, that to me is an instructional philosophy. I want all learners to achieve mastery, but that might be in a time-based model, right? I'm gonna do my best to get them there in a time-based model. Personalized learning for us, that's the pathway, that's the how, right? And tailored learning, and I love that you all are using this encompassing term here, when all of those things work in concert together for the benefit of learners, that truly can be and is tailored learning from our perspective. But I think it's really important for us to be distinct and not blur lines here. When we talk about tailored learning and personalized pathways, we're talking about a shared set of competencies that we all agree on, and saying that every learner will get there. We're not talking about different expectations or standards for different learners. We're not talking about personalizing the ceiling that someone will get to. We're saying everyone's going to get to this level of competency, and we're going to personalize the pathway to get there. And so at CBEN, we spent a lot of time talking about how learning should be measured by what you know and can do. If that's the gold standard, then how you get there, how much time it takes, how much support it takes, that's where the personalization can really kick in. And so I think that when we talk about this not just being tweaking a lesson plan, or it's not just saying to a teacher, hey, you got to be better in your classroom. These objectives aren't so good in your lesson plan. We need to, it's so much more than that, right? It's about saying, do we have clearly defined competencies? Have we created the systems and the structures that allow for a teacher to operate in a time variable way so they can actually personalize their instruction so that every learner can achieve competency? And we often say things like, oh, we have to meet learners where they're at. And we feel good about that. We pat ourselves on the back about that. But that's just the starting point. I hate to say it, but like, you don't have a choice. You have to meet learners where they're at. That's where they're at. But the question now becomes, what are we doing with that? Are we meeting them where they're at and we're keeping them there? Are we meeting them where they're at and tracking them into what we think they should be? Or are we meeting them where they're at and bringing them to competency? And I think that is really the promise and the potential of tailored learning. Did I answer all of that question?
You
because
did.
It was a meaty one.
You did.
Okay.
I know it was very meaty, but thank you. And I really love the framing of making sure that we are bringing our kids to competency, because that's the key. I know a lot of times in the student-centered framework, sometimes teachers think, oh, well, this is what that student can do. And as Lisa called that, the ceiling. The ceiling is the competency. We just need to design the pathway for every student to be able to access that competency by personalizing the way that we're designing instruction for them so that they can meet that competency.
That's right.
And Virgil, in the traditional model of schooling, advances students primarily based on time spent in the classroom rather than on demonstrated learning. In your experience and research, what challenges does this time-based structure create for students and educators? And how does a tailored learning approach provide a different way of organizing, teaching, learning, and progression?
Yeah, well, Lisa did such a great job of kickstarting the answer to that question. I think oftentimes if I go back to wearing my classroom educator or high school principal hat once again, I think the hardest part for us is a realization that it's impossible to measure student success solely based on time. Right? If we are advancing kids after 180 days, because time said they received a lot of information, we presented it, perhaps we created some really engaging, robust learning experiences, and as a result, we are going to advance them. Well, that's what we're doing on a daily basis, and what Lisa just described is a common tension that exists in our schools now across the country. We have heroic educators that see 30 to 200 kids every single day, trying to meet their needs, trying to deliver on the content, the curriculum, trying to keep up with the pacing guides that are established by us at the central office or at the state level. And we're doing our very best to ensure, as an educator, that we are meeting those very specific needs, those gaps, those interests for every single one of our kids, but also returning the very next day saying, I got to turn the page to the next set of curricula. No matter what, if you all are learners in our classrooms, no matter where each of you are, tomorrow we will continue. Some of you might be sitting there saying, I learned this 3 years ago and here I am again, doing the same information, the same content. For others, it might be a completely different language where you can't process or access the content because the gaps are so significant, and we have continued to turn the page and advance you because of your age, because of when you entered our school system, and because of the way our calendars are structured. So if we're really going to do this well, we really have, as what Lisa described, are be very clear and articulate about what are the competencies we're holding all children to, not some, but every single child in our schools, in our state, accountable to learning. How do we establish a structure or a set of systems that allows for flexibility and movement of those learners, not on an annual basis, but on a daily basis? And for educators, how do we establish those same conditions, right? So that for I as a teacher, for I as a principal, ensure that we're meeting their needs as well, in providing those tailored instructional models or instructional or pedagogy, assessment, learning experiences for not just some of the 30 kids or some of the 200 kids, but all of the learners that they serve. So what does that look like if I'm a high school principal again? What does that look like for my 100 teachers that I have on my campus? How do I utilize them as a team of teachers to really meet the needs of every single one of the kids that we are serving on a daily basis, rather than packing on the heroic shoulders of our educators to do it by themselves?
Thank you.
Can I, one thought I had a flashback to being a high school English teacher, high school principal, and I do think there is this like system level piece that we have to think through, but I also don't want to make it sound like our teachers, and I don't think this is anyone's intent, but like our teachers still need to be empowered to be able to work toward that. Like we can't wait for the system to catch up and redesign. And so one of the things I just had a flashback of was, I was a first year teacher, and I was, back then at least, they would give all the at-risk kids to the first year teacher. Brilliant idea, like who thought of that, right? And I will never forget the 10th grade English teacher coming to me and saying, oh, I used to teach that group of kids, and instead of doing Romeo and Juliet, the Shakespeare version, you're gonna do this comic book version with like little cartoon mice. That's what these kids, we gotta meet them where they're at, right? Mm-hmm. And I will never forget looking at her and saying, my class is not gonna read in 10th grade a comic book version of Romeo and Juliet. Like, that's not happening. And I made the mistake back then of saying to them, hey, you guys, the other class is reading a comic book version. We're not doing that, right? Like, we're gonna read the real version that everyone reads. My kids loved Shakespeare. Did they spite love Shakespeare? Maybe, because they were like, we're brighter, we're not gonna do the comic book version. But the reality is, like, we have to have these micro movements of advocacy on the ground while we're waiting for that system redesign to happen at the same time.
Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting that, because I was also thinking back to being a high school biology teacher, that I often said, but it was really true, if I had 75 kids that semester, I had 75 different lesson plans every day. Because every single one of those kids was in a little bit different spot, they needed a little bit different support, and I needed to tailor the instruction to meet them where they were. And I'm also really happy to tell you guys that we do have a breakout room where we have some teachers and principals and an AVID director coming from Pitt County. They're gonna talk about how they do this in their classrooms in their county. So encourage you that if you love what you're hearing here from our National Perspectives panel, to definitely check out that breakout room later on this afternoon. I do have another question that I'd love for both of you to respond to. And Virgil, we'll go to you first. Many schools experiment with elements of personalized or competency-based learning, but it can be difficult to move from isolated innovation to broader system change. Based on your experience, what conditions, such as leadership, policy alignment, teacher collaboration, or shared definitions of mastery, are the most important for tailoring learning to take root and scale across schools and districts?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll start with where we actually started today, is the shared definition. The goal of today is to establish those shared definitions. And just as Lisa articulated what is competency, what does that mean for North Carolina? What are the competencies that you believe are critical to the success of the future of North Carolina? And how do you spark, as Lisa just shared again, like how do you spark that at the ground level while also redesigning the system? So give you a couple of strategies that we have seen states and individual school systems do that we have seen to be and studied to be really effective. One, shared definitions. What is that shared vision? And how does everyone understand those shared definitions within that shared vision? So certainly we're talking about those of us that are here in the room having the conversation, but how do our young people understand what our shared vision for learning is? What does competency mean for them? Do they really understand what it means to achieve at mastery, at competency, and how tailored pathways are accessible to them? What do families understand about our system? Do they truly understand how to navigate a tailored learning environment? What does that look like? Going back again, wearing my principal and superintendent hat again, how do we provide space and time for our staffs, our families, our communities to co-design together this new paradigm that we're talking about around tailored, competency-based learning paradigms that transcend multiple layers of the system, certainly classroom, school, district, and community. 3, Leaders, we have to be in it with them. Right? Like we have to model what it means to learn in these environments as well. If we are only in the central office and not rolling up our sleeves alongside educators, family, community, we're going to miss opportunities to serve, to learn, and co-design along with our learning community. And lastly, I'd say, let's start to think about different measures of impact. Like what are we valuing that we want to study and we want to ensure that we're making progress or strides towards those new measures of impact. So if we're talking about competency, if all of our young people in North Carolina are achieving at mastery levels, what are the new outcomes or what are the new measures of success that we should be striving for? We're talking about K-12 achievement. Certainly we should talk about higher ed and workforce achievement. Certainly we should talk about community indicators of success, right? This is when we're talking about that paradigm shift that's happening in schools, what are the paradigm shifts or system redesigns that are occurring more broadly as well that we should be designing towards?
And so +1 to everything that Virgil just said, and if I can even go one click even underneath kind of that vision that he just painted, I think when we talk about common definitions, it's really easy to say, to kind of leave good enough alone. Like, oh, we want everyone to be a critical thinker. Cool, you're gonna teach critical thinking, you're gonna teach critical thinking. Okay, good job, everyone. It's like, no. What does that look like in action? What do we expect that to look like by the end of high school? And then bring in your community colleges, bring in your higher ed partners and say, hey, what do you want that to look like by the end of an associate's degree, by the end of a bachelor's degree? Bring in your employers, y'all. At CBEN, we work with employers across just about every field imaginable. And when we bring them together, before they talk about the technical skills that they need, they are talking about the dispositions that are usually evident in your portrait of a graduate, right? But how do we do one click better than that and actually say, what does this mean? And how do we make sure we have some kind of common definition that actually can be operationalized, right? That then allows us to say, this is what we are looking for in a performance-based assessment. This is how we know whether you have Lisa as a teacher or Virgil as a teacher or Maureen as a teacher. You're getting to competent. We haven't personalized different expectations. We've personalized to that level. And I think that bringing in that employer perspective kind of helps us do that. And then in the state of Kentucky, they actually did this mapping. They have what they call their 13 essential competencies, things that you would expect to see that are like the durable or the professional skills, and they mapped them. What does it look like? What are the behaviors we want to see by the end of high school, by the end of the associates, by the end of a bachelor's degree? And doing that not in isolation but in concert with each other will only help us close that opportunity gap that we see for our learners.
Thank you. All right, well, I'm sure our audience has questions for these two amazing experts, so I'd love to open it up to the floor to see who has questions or would like to learn more about all the different things that they've shared with us this morning.
Actually, Maureen, I do. Virgil, Lisa, as we focus on tailored learning, as best NC moves forward to congeal everybody around this idea that may be more simplistic, what's the risk of being overly trying to simplify? What do we need to be careful of as we rally towards something that can be understood more broadly and won't get lost in the alphabet soup of everything around the industry that's, as you well know, a very compound industry?
That's right.
It is kind of like the Goldilocks equation, right? Of like what's not too hot, not too cold, but just right. And so to me, one of the things that helps us kind of safeguard and get to that just right is that level of engagement that Virgil had said between families, communities, and not forgetting too that North Carolina is probably not a homogeneous state, right? Like, so what works in one region versus another, we need to have this right mix of nuance and actually time to uncover that nuance with shared standards. And so I think just being mindful of that and not thinking it has to be overly prescriptive, but it also can't be too vague. And so what is that just right equation? And for me, that comes with collaboration, lots of stakeholders coming together, and then just an appetite for continuous improvement. Look at the data, be willing to say as a leader, wow, we got this part wrong. What do we need to do better? And create that kind of culture of continuous learning and improvement. And I think those are some of the ingredients that at least we see that can help us get to success.
Yeah, that's really great description and great set of steps. And I'm taking a page out of North Carolina. I'd say, what are the sparks that can come from the new definitions or these engagement opportunities that you all are providing? What are those that'll create this multiplier effect towards the successes you're striving towards? And so I think the beauty of what we've been talking about the states or the regions or the communities that have done this work really well is that it has been really clear and transparent about what the vision is. Like, what are we striving towards? And then allowing flexibility, as Lisa described, to make progress towards that vision.
Great. Other questions? Yes, go ahead, Representative Blackwell.
Assuming that we move to this new paradigm, how do you assess competency? And going back to what Dr. McIntyre-Height said about having the same ceiling, which I guess is the same definition of competency for everyone, how do you maintain the integrity of the system that you come up with?
Such a great question.
Yeah. So at CBEN, and this is controversial for some, we believe that the way to assess this is through performance-based assessments, right? It cannot necessarily be multiple choice exam questions or standardized tests of competency, right? And so oftentimes when we talk about that, what we need are shared criteria or behaviors that we are looking for in that performance of competency. So I'm going to award you and deem you competent when you can do the behaviors or the performances that I want to see. It used to be all that was a nearly impossible lift for schools, both in K-12 and in higher ed, right? I can't possibly watch everyone do this. I can't possibly do that. But the reality is, if we embrace some forms of new technology, there are ways we can do that. We do avatar-based simulations where learners are given a really tough scenario and they have to work through it with a live actor and an avatar. We have some where it's an AI-based one. There's still a human in the loop. I just want to be very clear. This is not talking about AI replacing an assessor, a teacher, someone who can actually be on the ground with learners. But where can we start to leverage the technology so that we can be high touch where it matters most, right? And so if we're giving performance-based assessments where maybe something is being recorded and AI can actually tag behaviors, I as a teacher can look at that, validate it, and then I'm spending my time giving you personalized feedback on how to be better instead of spending my time grading the essay, looking over multiple choice test exams that oftentimes don't tell us if someone is competent or not. And so for me, it's performance-based assessment, and it is shared criteria of what performance looks like. There may be different assessments you can use as long as it gives you an opportunity to demonstrate that competency in the same way.
We sound like records, I think, but just from different. Are records still a thing?
They've made a comeback. Good news. Yeah.
Excellent. Good. So great question. Performance assessments are key, right? So you have the competencies. Like, how do we know young people have reached it unless they're able to do or perform in a variety of contexts? Certainly in our schools, but also in community, also in partnership with workforce. What might that look like, right? And so when we talk about competencies and coherence across the systems, we're talking certainly K-12, higher ed, and workforce. So what if we worked as a state to identify those competencies that we believe are critical to the future success and current day success of our state? If we did that in partnership with community and workforce, if we're able to create a coherent system that actually ensures that our young people are performing and demonstrating at mastery levels that actually align to those other credentials of value, right? Like, so what if as a young person now, I'm able to demonstrate my learning at work, on the athletic field, in clubs, in music, at concerts, doing community service, and I am also able to say, here's how I know I have achieved mastery in a variety of contexts. that was actually measured or honored or validated by my boss or by my community partner, because we all collectively understood what competency means, right? Like, because we all collectively designed the system together, and we ensured that those coherent systems existed. Like, we want to make sure when we're talking about what competency does, what we want to make sure it does is we don't have young people waiting at the next step, the next level, knocking at the door saying, hey, I'm ready. We want to make sure in a competency-based system that young people can just walk right through the open door and are not waiting for that next step.
I think too, to get to that system, which I recognize what we're describing can sound really lofty, but it really is, in some ways, as simple as just a culture of collaboration and calibration, right? So that if I'm in this district and you're in this district, we're cool with coming together and saying, hey, this was my assessment, this is how I did it, this is the way I scored it, and continuing to do that and continuing to improve the system in that way. And I think if you have a culture of collaboration and calibration together, that's how you enable that kind of system to work.
Yeah, and states that have done that really well, New Hampshire, Utah, Kentucky, Arkansas, Alabama, like others have done that work already and have established a roadmap of considerations if you're thinking about collaboration and calibration.
I'm Robin Furman with Teach for America. I'm curious how you're thinking about and what you're seeing in other states around when this paradigm is adopted. What do we know about how the competencies of the adults in front of students need to change? The teachers, the administrators, the instructional hosts. What needs to be different about their mastery of certain skills?
It's almost like we planted Robin there.
I'll take it.
Good question. Thanks. Great question, Robin. Right? Clearly, we're going to have to rethink what are the professional competencies that we want to ensure our educators, but also what does this mean for, again, broken record, families, community, workforce partners. We definitely have to think differently about the very pieces that Lisa just described. Robin is answering that question. How do we as educators understand what it means to connect and collaborate with one another? The idea of calibration is not something that we talk a lot about in teacher school and principal school. So how do we develop those competencies as professional educators? Connecting with community in a collective impact model, that's not something that we learn in principal or superintendent school. So we have to think differently about what those professional standards and expectations, just as we're talking about competencies and expectations and raising the bar for young people, same is the case for us as professionals that are serving our young people.
And I also think too, there's an opportunity for us to engage our professional associations too. You know, the INTAS standards have been pretty static for quite some time. And so engaging at that level and saying, hey, what are some of those new professional standards? But it does require, I don't want to just say professional development, but really like a retooling of like, what is the role of an instructor in a classroom? What is the role of an assessor of competency? Does it stay the same? Is it different? And I think envisioning what the whole ecosystem can look like and then defining those competencies in concert with some of those folks can be a really beneficial step.
Many states have thought about the profile of a graduate and then the gateways towards that graduate, right? We're not only thinking about that at the high school level. What does that mean for our 4-year-olds entering school? What are those gateways at 6 to 8 years old, 10 to 12 years old? So we're making progress all along the way. And as a result of that too, we're starting to really think about how do we ensure that we collectively are making progress or are marching towards that, Robin? And so one big step that many states have taken in addition to the profile of a graduate is if this is the type of learning ecosystem we want to establish in our region and our state, what does this mean for the profile of an educator, or the profile of a legislator, or the profile of a school leader? And really, so that way, again, we're coherently thinking about multiple layers of the system to make this vision a reality.
And John, I think Winston in the back had a question, and this will have to be our last question, unfortunately.
So super excited. But thinking about as we move to scale and tailor learning for individual kids, the responsibility of the adults to become calibrated, not just across the district, but across the state and across the country, is critical in the equity sense. It's really a powerful tool when you absorb a new child into a school that does tailored learning, but for a child who goes from a school who's doing tailored learning to one that doesn't, it could be catastrophic. And we still live in a country and in a state where lower income people move more. They're moving schools, moving neighborhoods, moving across state lines for a variety of reasons. So how do we balance that risk for those not moving into a system that's calibrated, but into one that's not yet?
I mean, this is the $1 million question, right? This is an equity imperative at the end of the day. And so I would say that step one is, as you're designing the new system, I would say design with the most vulnerable learner in mind. So that way what you design is going to work for that person as well as it will work for the learner who's going to be in all the AP classes and is going to be fine no matter what we do to him or her in the classroom, right? And so I'm a big fan of kind of designing with our most vulnerable stakeholders, our most vulnerable learners at the center of what we do. And then I do think part of this is teaching our young children and our students, our high school students, how to learn and how to navigate systems, right? And so that's also what we used to call the hidden curriculum. And I think it's an imperative that we make that not hidden and visible for them. And so that way, as they're moving, they maybe have a toolkit of the questions to ask, the things to be thinking about as they move systems. But I do think just designing with the most vulnerable learner at the center of this new system that you design will help us at least mitigate some of that.
Yeah, great response. And I'm thinking about how do we establish a system of learning currency that young people can leave with? Right? So what is that? What are the platforms? What are the systems that, whether it's our own children in our own neighborhood schools or their friends, if they move, they are leaving with what is that learning currency that they can take to their new learning community to say is, here's what I have demonstrated mastery on, here's how I can advocate for myself to show this is what I've actually learned in a variety of contexts, and as a result, I deserve to be here. Or I need continued support on X, Y, and Z, and I know it because of these learning experiences I had in my previous learning environment. So the key piece is to be able to do that. What are the digital platforms? We all have digital wallets. We all have profiles, professional profiles and resumes. How do we create those structures and those systems for our young people so they're leaving with them, so it's a clear, so as they're going to their new learning community and their new educators and their new community partners, they can say, here's what I'm ready for and here's what I need.
All right, well, thank you both so much, and I hope the audience all joins me in thanking these two incredible national experts for joining us today.
Thank you.